Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this lesson about colonization. I am Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. This will be part one of several video lessons about this topic. So without further ado, here we go. All right, so some key ideas for early colonization. Number one, there are several European powers involved. Okay, so we've got several European powers involved. We're going to talk about all of them, but the two most important ones for American history or for United States history are going to be Spain and England. Okay, now the Dutch are involved, the French are involved, you've got a lot of different people involved, but Spain and England are the ones you want to pay the closest attention to. There are also three distinct regions in North America. You have the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. Now this is not just important for this unit, this is going to be even more important as we advance through the content, and when we get to the Civil War, you're going to start to see some correlation, okay, some causation, some cause and effect, okay, it's very important, three different regions. We're going to talk about indentured servants and slaves and how that they factored in as key features of the settlement of North America. And then we're going to talk about the three types of colonies. So we have three regions and we also have three types. Okay, so we'll talk about that as we keep going. Okay, so European powers, let's talk about this madness. So the Spanish, they're very important. They control Florida, they controlled all of Mexico, and much of what we know as the Southwest. States like California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, those states were all originally Mexico. Okay, those would not become a part of the United States until much, much later, but we'll get to that. The French, they're mostly in Canada. They were also in New Orleans for a while, at least until Napoleon. But the French are not as big of an issue. There in the colonial wars, the French really took Canada and didn't play as much of a role in what we now consider the United States. The Dutch were very, very important, even though they didn't stay. But they had a few colonies in what is now New York. So there's a really cool story about how New York got its name and how the English got New York. You should ask me about this in class if I forget to tell you about it, okay? So you should ask me about this in class because it's a pretty cool story. Now, the English, for United States history purposes, these guys were the most important, all right? They settled the vast majority of what we now know to be the 13 colonies, and they had colonies all the way up and down the East Coast, so it's very important we know about the English. Okay, the Spanish. They controlled the following areas, most of South America, Central America, what we think of as the Southwestern U.S., and also Florida. Florida would not become a state until 1819. Okay, so it's going to be a while before Florida is actually part of what we consider to be the United States. It stays Spanish for quite some time. They were the supreme naval power until 1588 when Queen Elizabeth took credit for the destruction of the Spanish Armada. My guy should remember the story. I told you about it in class, but if you're curious, ask me. I'll tell you all about it. They also maintained control over their New World territory until the 1800s. See, when the American colonists revolted and had our little revolution, we kind of put ideas into the heads of other colonies. And not too long after we had the American Revolution, nations in South and Central America started following suit and started throwing off the yoke of colonial control. The French. The fur trade was very, very important for the French. They were into the furs. New France was what they termed their land in the New World. It changed over time from privately owned and operated to becoming a royal colony, basically because the French could not manage their finances and needed money. But originally, the colonies were owned by private companies, very similar to how English colonization got started. But then they transitioned into royal colonies. The colony was only run by two people, the governor and this thing called an intendant. You don't need to worry about knowing the definition of that. They used indentured servants to populate the colony, and women were sent to serve as wives to eligible men because there were mostly men there, no women, and men are not going to be happy with that. So the French actually sent women specifically to serve as wives for these men. All right, the Dutch. The Dutch East India Company. Very, very, very important Dutch East India Company. I'm just putting that out there. It's very important. Dutch East India Company. It was founded in 1602, and this corporation made the Dutch an economic powerhouse. It's what they used to manage and operate their colonies. There was also the West India Company. It was an extension of the East India Company, or of the Dutch East India Company. And the one of their major colonies was called New Netherland. It focused on the fur trade and had a very diverse population. And it's a perfect example of the American concept of the melting pot. I don't know if you've heard that, but America is known as the melting pot because we have so many different people from so many different countries, religions, backgrounds, ethnicities, races, religions, all kinds of different stuff. And so America kind of got this nickname as the melting pot. And this is one of the earliest examples of that, New Netherland. There were so many different people there that were really just trying to make a new life for themselves. The English. All right, so they had colonies in New England, middle, and the southern areas. All right, they started gaining ground against the Spanish and French in the 1600s because the Spanish Armada was destroyed in 1588, and even though the 1500s were the Spanish century, the 1600s were going to be very good for England in terms of colonization, the 1700s even more so. Now, the English finally become the supreme colonial power in the New World in the 18th century, or that's the 1700s. The 1700s were a big, big century for the English, also for the Americans. Now, there's so much to talk about for the English colonies that we have to break them into regions because I can't just go, no, we have to really go into detail here. But before we talk about each region, we're going to talk about Jamestown. Jamestown, super important, Jamestown. All right, so Jamestown, Virginia. Twice. There were two of them, okay? But a lot of history books won't talk about this, and maybe teachers won't tell you this, but there were actually two Jamestowns. The second one ended up being the first permanent English settlement in the United States. First permanent English, because St. Augustine was the first permanent European settlement in the United States. So that may or may not show up on an exam. So you should make sure to differentiate. All right, so the first one was in 1607. It was operated by Captain John Smith. There's a really cool story about him. I'll tell you about that in class. That's good times. And it disbanded, the colony disbanded in 1609 because they were having some issues. And that's the story. Those issues we're going to talk about in class. The second excursion was in 1610. Okay, it was reconstituted, refounded. And the colonists had left the original site to look for greener pastures, but they actually ran into some other colonists on the way, and they were like, "Oh, you want to make a colony too? Cool. Let's just go back to where we were before, and we'll restart it." And that time, it actually stuck. Now, something important to remember in terms of the colonists' interaction with the Native Americans was the Powhatan Confederacy. Okay, it was a union of 30 different Indian tribes and was ruled by the leader of one tribe. It was kind of like a Native American United Nations. If you think about how all the countries nowadays go and meet at the UN to work out problems and stuff and to make decisions, that's what this confederacy was. Okay, with 30 different Indian tribes that were working together to try to make a better life for all of themselves. Okay, so the three key colonial regions, we've got New England. Right up there, we've got the middle, and we've got the southern. Okay, New England colonies are Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Middle colonies are New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Whoops, New Jersey. That's supposed to be a Y for New York. Delaware, and Maryland. So New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, Maryland. Then the southern colonies were North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia. Now, originally, the Carolinas were just one thing. They were just Carolina. They split later on, but we'll talk about that when that happens. All right, so surprise for my children, surprise. So instead of me telling you about the colonies, why don't you tell me about them? So this is a homework assignment. You're going to have to do this homework assignment and bring it into class. I'll tell you about due dates when next week when we get into class. So you need to find out the following information about each region. All right, I need you to tell me about the climate and weather, the government, the purpose of the founding, because each of the colonies were founded for different reasons, their key economic activity or activities, the date it was established, and the religion of the colony or of the region. Okay. Now here is a little bit of general info to help get you started. But if I were you, I would start working on this as soon as humanly possible. Okay, so New England. New England was mostly Puritan. Shipbuilding and trade were the key economic activities. They had very, very harsh winters. So they had short summers and very long, harsh winters. They also had a long life expectancy, though, which is interesting. So I guess the idea behind that is if you're, hardy enough to survive those harsh winters, you can basically make it through anything, so you live a long time. Now, in the middle colonies, this is a bit tougher because the religions varied, okay? The economic activities were actually a mix of the two other regions. So they had some of the same activities as New England and also some of the same as the southern colonies, depending on which middle colony you're talking about. Malaria was really bad, especially in the Chesapeake Bay area. That was very, very bad. It killed off a lot of people. So life expectancy was not so good here, all right? The southern colonies were mostly Protestant. They used cash crops. That was their big picture economic activity, cash crops. What a cash crop is where you grow food for money. You have acres and acres and acres and acres of the same very, very lucrative crop. Okay, maybe it's tobacco, maybe it's cotton, although cotton, that's a major misnomer. Everybody thinks that the South started with cotton. No, 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 no. Tobacco was the thing when you started with cash crops. Cotton comes much, much later. Lovely weather is usually present, but it did get a little bit hot at times. Life expectancy for plantation owners was good times. Life expectancy for slaves, bad times, not good. So life expectancy for owners, good. Expectancy for slaves, bad. All right. Okay, so I will post this PowerPoint on my website by itself without the video lesson, but these are some sites that I've already taken a look at, and I've evaluated them for their accuracy, so you can feel confident about going here and doing some research. You are, of course, free to use other sites if you would like, but to get you started, if you'd like to take a look at these four, these are some options that you have. All right, indentured servants and slaves. Let's talk about them. Now, there are differences, but there are also several similarities, okay? So what is an indentured servant? Let's start with that. It was a laborer who agreed to work for a specified period of time in exchange for passage to America. Usually, it was 5 to 7 years, okay? That was the usual time frame for indentured servants. Now, right here, this PBS thing right down here, that's a great link about indentured servants. You should go there, and by should, you must go there because you need to take notes on that, and information from this will appear on the exam. So, by should, you need to go there. Now, slave. What is a slave? A person who is the legal property of another and forced to obey them. All right? This person is not a person according to the law at this point. A slave is property. It's the equivalent of a dog or a cow or a horse. Okay? Now, some really good reliable information can be found at this link. And again, when I say should go, it means you must go. You must go to that site and take notes, okay? So what do they have in common? They both lived miserable lives. They both did the same kind of work, especially in the early stages of colonization, and they were both extremely low in the social ladder. Indentured servants were above slaves, but really not by much. They had a very, very rough go of it. And most indentured servants actually died before their contracts were finished. I mean, people literally worked them to death. So they never had to make good on the contract. And they got a lot. The people who paid for the passage were the ones who made out like bandits. All right, so here's another method of comparing and contrasting these things. You can pause the video and go ahead and read this on your own. If you have any questions about it, you can ask me in class, but you can go ahead and take a look at this on your own. All right, so 3 types of colonies. 3. There's a royal colony, a proprietary colony, and a charter colony. Okay, so what do these things look like? Okay, so we have a little chart here. So charter colonies, Connecticut and Rhode Island are examples. They had a governor and the legislature was elected by colonists, okay? Now, important to note here, Great Britain had the right to approve governor, but the governor could not veto the legislature, okay? So even in the earliest stages, we have the beginnings of democracy happening, all right? Now here, proprietary colonies, Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. The proprietor was selected the governor and the upper house. Colonists selected the lower house. So we have a bit of a combination here. The proprietor was free to rule as he wished. And it was always a he, because you know at this period, women are not allowed to rule. So the proprietor could basically become a de facto dictator if he wanted to. Royal colonies, these are examples there. Georgia, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Vast majority of the colonies. They were directly ruled by Great Britain. Directly ruled by Great Britain, which means Great Britain called the shots for all these guys. Okay, the king appointed the governor in the upper house. Colonists elected the lower house, but the lower house really couldn't do anything if the king and the governor and upper house wanted something done. There was really no recourse for them to fight back against anything. That's it for now. Part 2 will be along shortly. I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you next time.